other folks here, we'll bring them up to the panelists and we'll keep moving. We're going to try to allow some more time for question and answer during the panel discussions. So I'll be introducing our first speaker, Toni Hardesty, who oversees the Nature Conservancy's work across the state with conservation projects that protect land and water. Previously, she served as the director of Idaho Department on Environmental Quality, and she was appointed to that role by Governor Dirk Kempthorne in 2004, and then reappointed by Governor Otter. A native here of the Gem State, she's worked for the Environmental Protection Agency and also in the private sector as an environmental consultant, working with and assisting both private industry, government agencies, nonprofits on a wide range of issues. Toni Hardesty will welcome us back.
Good morning. It's great to see everybody here back today. Welcome everybody here in Boise. And a big shout out to those people who are in Pocatello, Ashton, Moscow, and streaming from all across the state, I am told. So that's great. You know, I heard many people talking yesterday about what a great energy there was in the room, and I know I certainly felt it, and obviously others did as well. Pretty exciting to be here talking not only about the challenges, but really seeing some of the incredible solutions that are coming forward in Idaho. When we put the conference together, the planning committee shared some data that showed that 2/3 of Idahoans believe that the climate is changing, but only 1/3 of them are talking about it. And I was thinking about that last night, and I was thinking about Dottie Stimpson, who started the City Club, and her phrase that nothing happens until people begin talking and listening. And that's one of the overarching goals of this conference, was to get people talking about this issue. And we hope that this will be the first of the dialogue that will continue on this important topic. There's other polling data that I think is super interesting as well. One of the polls shows us that most people, while they believe climate change is happening, they don't believe that they are personally being impacted by this. Secondly, they believe it is such a big problem that there's really nothing they can do about it. So I think if there's nothing else you take away from this, if you think about the conversations and the dialogue that you heard yesterday, first, we know that Idahoans are being impacted by climate change. In fact, what we heard from the speakers yesterday is basically, unless you don't use water, electricity, recreate, eat, breathe, send your kids to public schools relying on endowment, or plan to grow old, you are, in fact, being impacted by climate change. But on a more positive note, what we also heard is that there are very real solutions and actions being taken in Idaho by Idahoans on this topic. I know for the Nature Conservancy, we see this as one of the most pressing issues that we are dealing with. For 50 plus years, we have been doing conservation in this state, trying to conserve Idaho lands and waters. And we know that climate change puts these conservation projects at risk. So we have a lot at stake. But we also have an incredible amount of optimism and hope. This past month, the Nature Conservancy, along with 15 other research institutions, published a National Academy of Science paper. This work shows that 37% of carbon mitigation needed between now and 2030 to keep global temperatures below the 2 degrees Celsius increase possible are possible through what we call natural climate solutions. Now, these natural climate solutions are achieved through implementing protection and smart management practices through our forests, farms, grasslands, and wetlands. These management practices, if implemented, will not only mitigate carbon, they will also provide water filtration, flood buffering, improved soil health, protection of biodiversity, and enhanced climate resilience. As I wandered the halls yesterday, I heard a lot of great conversation happening out there, and I took note of many of the things that I was hearing people say were sort of their aha moments, or things that they were taking away that were providing the hope and the optimism to them about solutions on this. And while I can't capture everything in this few moments, here's a few that I wanted to share with you. This is some of the things I was hearing from people. First, there was a lot of talk about Kate Gordon's observation that there is opportunity here in Idaho. That in the face of climate change, we can use our incredible renewable resources to both be positive impact on climate change and to provide economic opportunity for Idahoans. I heard people quoting Kate's haiku: use electricity, not too much, mostly renewable. I heard people talking about the fact that they learned that 40 countries and 20 jurisdictions have a price on carbon. That China has pledged to manufacture only electric vehicles, no combustion engines, by 2019, 2 years from now. That the American Institute of Architects has a goal of all buildings being designed to net zero energy usage by 2030. That while we may not be seeing leadership at the federal level on this issue, we're seeing incredible leadership at the local level. That Boiseans have expressed a clear preference for the fact that least cost is not the driving thing for them, but best value is. Idaho and cities are now thinking of water not as wastewater, stormwater, drinking water, but as one water. And they are approaching this resource in a more holistic, complete cycle way. That we all can learn from Josiah and the Nez Perce tribe and our relationship with the natural world and our sense of time. And that a majority of people agreed with Steve Burgos that engineers should never, never be in charge of marketing or branding our products or ideas. If there was this theme for yesterday, I think it was seek first to understand and then be understood. Now today we have an opportunity to build on that understanding. We get to take our next step and we get to help craft solutions that are possible for our Idaho communities and our state. What you're going to hear from this morning are 2 more panels discussing yet again innovative and business solutions that are being crafted and implemented right here in Idaho. Climate change issues and solutions are not owned by anyone, which provides both the challenge and the opportunity. It means no one is going to sweep in and solve this problem for us. It means every single one of us at this conference gets to play a role in help crafting what those solutions are and how they are the right solution for the community and the state that we live in. I know for one, I'm incredibly optimistic as I heard the stories yesterday and I looked around this room with this incredible diverse audience, businesses, universities, tribes, nonprofits, academics, everybody here, citizens, looking towards these innovative solutions. So this afternoon, I have a challenge for each one of you. As you leave the room today, I would ask at the end of the day for 3 things for you guys to think about. First, commit to engaging and encouraging this dialogue with others. Second, be committed to finding positive solutions forward. And 3, invite others to join in so that we can continue to take the next steps towards solving what is this significant, but I believe solvable challenge for Idaho. So thank you. Tom?
That's great, Toni. Commit to dialogue, solutions going forward, and invite others. I'm here again to introduce the next panel and our moderator. The panel is Innovative Solutions by Idaho's Industrial Leaders, and it's an important voice in the room. Our moderator is Julia Grant. She is the Sustainability Program Manager for Micron Technology, and she's led business and community impact initiatives for the past 18 years. The experience includes policy creation, corporate sustainability efforts, ecological restoration, and strategic plan development. She's motivated by complex challenges, and her most satisfying projects have involved leading collaborative efforts among somewhat unlikely partners: certification of Boise Cascade timberlands, conservation of Boise Foothills open space, and the creation of the Idaho Coalition of Land Trusts. Please join me in welcoming Julia to the stage.
Good morning, and I would love my panelists to come join me up here at this point. And I would say good morning to my friends in Ashton, Idaho. It's great to have you guys here today, and up in Moscow, Pocatello, and then here in this space at BSU in Boise. So I've got a question for you all this morning. Do you know an intrapreneur? Do you even know what an intrapreneur is? That's someone inside a large organization who's given the authority and the support to promote an innovative product or strategy development. Characteristics of an intrapreneur include many of the same characteristics as an entrepreneur: tenacity, risk tolerance, passion, resourcefulness, diplomacy, adaptability, and results. Intrapreneurs are particularly drawn to new initiatives within their organizations. And as these individuals build their aptitude for recognizing and solving important problems, they also establish their track records as can-do accelerators within their organizations. This morning, you will hear from 3 intrapreneurs within their organizations on why climate is important to their company and what approaches they're taking to make their company more resilient to climate change. So first, on my left, I have Erik Gonring. He is currently the Industry Affairs and Sustainability Manager for J.R. Simplot Company's Plant Science Division. In this role, Erik is responsible for industry engagement, public affairs, and support of marketing and commercial initiatives. Erik's role requires him to work collaboratively with multiple stakeholders, both inside and outside of Simplot. Prior to being at Simplot, Erik worked for one of Simplot's customers, McDonald's, and in change management consultant for hostile merger acquisitions. Erik holds an MBA from Purdue and a BA in public relations from Marquette University. And then we have, to his left, we have David Eichberg. David is the Global Initiatives Lead, Sustainability and Social Innovation at HP. He has over 15 years of experience in the corporate sustainability space. He oversees HP's sustainability goals, metrics, and environmental footprint initiatives, as well as reporting. David has led programs for communications, regional social investment, technology, and thought leadership showcases, sustainability evaluation, and strategic collaborations with nonprofits and NGO partners such as Conservation International and World Wildlife Fund. Previously, David worked for Business for Social Responsibility, BSR, as many of us know them, the Applied Communications and U.S. Congress Office of Technology Advancement. He holds a master's degree in Public and International Affairs from the University of Pittsburgh and a BA from Cal Berkeley. And then we have Rich Berger. He is with Clif, and he is their VP of Engineering Food Supply. He is guided by the company's 5 bottom lines: sustaining our brands, our business, our people, our community, and the planet. Rich joined Clif in January of 2014. Prior to that, He was the director of engineering for Bimbo Bakeries USA, the Sara Lee Corporation, Earth Grains Baking Companies, and Anheuser-Busch Brewery. He lives in San Francisco, but spends a lot of time here in Twin Falls, where Clif Bar has a plant. And he, in his spare time, enjoys triathlons and spending time outdoors. We're going to start with Erik.
Do these work?
Turn them on.
Does this work?
Yeah? Yeah? Okay. I'm just more comfortable not behind a podium, so I hope that's okay. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's really great to have an opportunity to participate in dialogue with so many people that are interested in this topic. I really think it's good for climate change, and it's good for Idaho. So thank you. So I'm going to start with a topic that I'm sure is top of mind for many of you, and that's the life cycle of a French fry. So when you think about the life cycle of a French fry, you have to take into account multiple stages of production. You know, how does it get from a potato seed into that final French fry that you buy, you know, wherever they're sold? So there's, you know, measurement of that is not an easy thing. Right, so we know that the majority of the climate change impact that occurs in the manufacturing of a French fry occurs at the farm level. But there are also distribution impacts. There are also storage impacts. A lot of potato varieties, you know, they get harvested once a year, so they store at colder temperatures, which require refrigerants. And then there's also the manufacturing process. So I'm going to start with the manufacturing process. That's more in our company's direct control. And it's also an area where we see clear bottom line impact. When you create greater efficiencies in your manufacturing operations, you know, there's no question that you can see both the monetary as well as the environmental or social benefits that come from those types of investments. So we have a great example right here in Idaho. We've created essentially the standard in sustainable French fry processing out in Caldwell. This plant was close to a 9-figure investment. It is built to be a 50 to 100-year plant, meaning that it was built as an absolute model of efficiency to ensure that years into the future, it would be able to produce French fries more efficiently than any plant in existence, at least in the US. I don't know about globally, but, and so some of the things that prove that right are the way that the plant utilizes potatoes off the field. So the efficiency is something along the lines of 95 to 98% of the potatoes that get purchased can now be turned into usable product. Anything that doesn't get used gets turned into cattle feed. So from terms of the potatoes we buy and comes into the plant, you're wasting essentially nothing. Water use, a lot of water use in French fry processing. So what happens to that water? Well, we reclaim it on site, reuse it. Anything that's not potable gets used as irrigation on nearby fields. There's also a 20% improvement in energy efficiency. So this plant does 4 million pounds of potatoes a day. A lot of potatoes. And I've toured this plant, and it's unbelievably impressive. But of those 4 million pounds, right? So that's a lot of energy. This plant achieves a 20% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions compared to its previous manufacturing facility. So it's very much set up for the future. But like I mentioned, and this is not to take credit away from Simplot, because I think it's a really important thing that they made this type of investment, but it's easier to make investments in the parts of your operations you control and achieve sustainability and efficiency outcomes. It's harder when you're working with a large group of farmers. So what can you do to create more sustainable outcomes? So that's at the farm level. What we've really focused on is looking at the farm level, input per unit of output metrics. So I'm going to talk about something that's not the sexiest topic in the world, but it's very relevant. It's variety development. You know, there's the russet Burbank variety potato. Okay, that's the potato that we've all known to grow and love. It's a 100-year-old variety. It was bred by Luther Burbank 100 years ago. And that's because potatoes are very hard to breed. And also it has achieved very kind of that sensory perfection. You know, people love the way it tastes as a baked potato, and they love the way it tastes as a French fry. That said, there hasn't been a lot of innovation in 100 years. And so that's a problem. Russet Burbank also has a tendency to be a little bit of a resource hog. And so you need to start improving on the varieties that you help farmers procure in order to make a significant difference in those input per unit of output metrics. And so that's really where we've started to focus a lot of our time, is in scaling varieties that use less fertilizer, scaling varieties that have higher yield off the field, so that you're actually, you're taking acres out of production in theory, because you're getting sometimes 30, 40% more yields off that same piece of ground. I'm going to talk more about that later, but I think for now, that's where I'll leave it. Thank you.
One thing I wanted to ask you all, you have the blue note cards at your table, so make sure that you're writing down your questions as we proceed with the presentation. Rich Berger's next, and then we will have some folks gather those and bring them up here.
All right. Thanks, Julia. This has been a really great summit so far. I've learned so much this week, and I just thought before I started, I just thought maybe we'd give it up for the planning committee, Deb, Amber, Kelsey, Bass, and our moderator for our panel, Julia. Great job. And I'd also like to compliment all of you who are here at the summit. Conversation creates change. I just heard Toni say, nothing happens until people start talking and listening. There's an individual responsibility here, but it is a business community. I think we can have the greatest impact working together. My name is Rich Berger. I'm with Clif Bar. I call the San Francisco Bay Area my home. I work out of our Emeryville home office, and I'm pretty new to Idaho. But in the last 4 years, I've spent quite a bit of time here. I was helping the company with the siting and the building of the new facility in the Magic Valley. Clif Bar was born on a bike. Our founder, Gary Erickson, went out on a 175-mile bike ride. And if you ever get a chance to meet Gary, you would understand that that's like a daily thing for him. He's in great shape. And this is actually Gary. That's actually a photo in Europe. But he was on a 175-mile bike ride, I think, near San Jose. And he had 6 energy bars with him. And he got through about 3 of them, and he couldn't stomach it anymore. And that was what he calls and what we call the epiphany moment, where he just said, there's got to be a way to make a better tasting bar, and really a way to run a different kind of a company. And that was the start of Clif Bar. Bars went onto the market 25 years ago. We just celebrated our 25-year anniversary at Clif Bar. We're a 5 bottom line business model, or what we call our 5 aspirations. We sometimes represent it as a wheel, and I think it's more than a relationship. I think to our founding on a bike. I think it speaks to the balance that we believe is needed to run a business the right way. Each spoke is important to the structure of the company. If any one spoke weakens, the structure is altered or it's biased, right? Every impact, small or large, affects the integrity of this wheel. So at Clif, as we make decisions, business decisions, we're keeping all of these spokes in mind, these aspirations in mind. and making sure that we're considering the consequences, both positive and negative consequences to these aspirations and to our people. We have a very strong relationship with a co-pack network of bakers in Canada and the US, and actually one here in Boise. And here are some of the kitchen crafted products that are made there at these bakeries. We needed to supplement our contract bakers with our own manufacturing, not just to tend to our growth or fill our capacity gaps, but because it provided a very exciting opportunity to extend our aspirations into manufacturing, to be self-sufficient and move in this direction of resiliency by taking control of our operations. So we began this journey to self-manufacturing a year and a half ago. We built a beautiful, sustainable facility in Twin Falls in the same time frame. We welcomed a wonderful team at an existing bakery in Indianapolis. So we essentially brought on board two efficient, high-capacity operations in a very short amount of time. Just practically overnight, we went from 300 employees to a little over 1,000 employees. It's been great. We have a critical role now as a food company. Agriculture and food production account for 1/3 of the globe's greenhouse gases, and 17% of the energy used in our economy is somehow related to food. The majority of that use is in the processing, the packaging, the warehousing, the distribution of this food. So my point here is that there is incredible opportunity, I think, to make a positive climate impact through our practices. We're a food company, and our foundation starts with food and agriculture. One of the largest impacts we feel we can make to climate resiliency is through organic and sustainable agricultural practices and building the health of our soils to help sequester carbon and increase water storage. 3/4 of all the ingredients we source are organic. Through our amazing Seed Matters program, we've awarded nearly $2 million in grants for organic crop breeding fellowships, and we're spearheading a $10 million campaign to create endowments at 5 public universities. The impacts: more jobs, 3,500 tons of synthetic fertilizer that is not being introduced into the soil, and over 30,000 acres of land that are being farmed organically without synthetic fertilizer or chemical pesticides. We can't say that we have a sustainability program with integrity without addressing climate. Our commitment to climate and energy needs to be parallel to our commitment to organic. And at Clif, we treat energy like an ingredient. We're sourcing 100% clean, green power for all facilities owned and operated by Clif Bar, including the Twin Falls facility. Our most recent purchases invest in wind energy, pictured here at the Meadow Creek wind farm in Ryrie, Idaho. I think I'm saying that right. Is it Ryrie or Ryrie? It's Ryrie. I apologize for those from Ryrie. Since 2002, our operations have been carbon neutral, with the help of Native Energy's Help Build program that delivers both social and environmental benefits. And the new bakery in Twin Falls is not only crafting food for our adventures, some of which I hope you grabbed on the way in or will grab on the way out, but it's also set a new bar for efficiency. Now, I actually wrote that down, a new bar for efficiency, but I just noticed after my first cup of coffee that was kind of funny, actually. This place uses 21% less energy, 37% less water, and diverts 94% of its waste from landfill and incineration. We're honored to have been awarded the Green Plant of the Year by Food Processing, and the Sustainable Plant of the Year by Food Engineering. Our goal is to go beyond the 4 walls, though, to build the climate movement. For example, our 50/50 by 2020 program has a green power goal to encourage 50 of our supply chain facilities, including our suppliers, to use at least 50% green power for the electricity used to make Clif products. To reach this goal, Clif Bar covers the costs of expert consulting to help the suppliers explore green power opportunities. So it's providing knowledge there. And we recognize and support the suppliers through their journey. This is a completely voluntary approach, but the response has really been amazing. We're more than halfway through our goal here. We've got 31 suppliers now that have achieved the 50% green power level, and they're really glad they did it. When you talk to them, they're like, we wish we had done this a lot earlier. Our employees are also engaging in the climate movement as well. We offer generous and helpful incentives to encourage them to purchase fuel efficient or fully electric vehicles. 430 vehicles have been purchased to date. This is a third of our employees, and 100 of these vehicles were purchased locally right there in Twin Falls. I would have liked to have been the Prius salesperson in Twin Falls. That would have been very nice. Clif Bar is also helping to make our homes more energy efficient through incentives to do some things there and commute in a very smart way, and to get out there and enjoy our national parks. And we're making an effort to move more ingredients and finished product by rail. Our rail initiative is part of our strategy to reduce the impact from transportation. Our logistics, planning, and sourcing teams, who are just wonderful at what they do, have worked to transition shipping from road to rail. We're projected to avoid 1 million truck miles by the end of this year and save over 300 tons of carbon emissions. We've got a long way to go here, but I think that the train is moving in the right direction. The train is moving in the right direction. So that's a very high level view of how we're responding to our changing climate. We're looking at our supply chain from seed to backpack, really. It's a vision to reduce our ecological footprint, craft our food with organic and sustainable ingredients, bake it in facilities that run on renewable energy, and recycle all waste, package it in eco-friendly packaging, and ship it in a way that doesn't pollute. We've got a long way to go, but we're making some great progress. So before I hand the podium off to David, I wanted to introduce 3 teammates at Clif who are here with me at the summit this week, and who I just think a lot of. So Wade, do you mind standing up? Wade is our environmental health and safety manager in Twin Falls. And he does a great job of not only making sure that we're meeting the regulatory needs, but also doing the right thing. And that's most of the time, exceeding those expectations, those regulatory expectations. Zach, will you stand up real quick? Zach is our sanitation manager. Zach's got a really important job at Clif Bar. We're a lot of allergens go into our products, so we consider each allergen as one that we must treat as a separate allergen. So there's a lot that goes into cleaning the bakery before we move on to making another flavor. And finally, I'd like to introduce Carolina. Carolina, will you stand up? Carolina is, I work with Carolina in Emeryville in California. She's our manager of sustainability and who I learn a ton from. And if there's anyone from Clif Bar that you all should get to, if there was one person you should get to know, it's Carolina. You will really enjoy talking to her, and you'll learn a lot. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, I want to thank Julia for hosting the panel today. I want to thank my fellow panelists. I'm a fan of your products already, and now I'm a fan of your action on climate. Thank you as well to all the organizers of the summit. It takes a lot of work, a lot of initiative, and you're really starting an important dialogue that, as Toni spoke, is an essential step in order for us to be successful and address the challenges posed by a changing climate. I wanted to start just by sharing, and then with a perspective on that I had the unique privilege of just coming back, having attended the COP23 climate summit that's happening in Bonn this week, as part of the U.S. business delegation that was present in order to express our continued support around the Paris Agreement and the steps that need to be taken. And one of the things that I specifically shared on each occasion I could was this summit and that this was happening. And one of the things I clearly heard was, as Toni said, the level and the need for dialogue and action and innovation is essential, and it's essential at the local level. Because while these targets and rule books now are being set at the global level, ultimately it's going to come down to local action and engagement and collaboration. So at HP, like sustainability broadly, for us, climate action stems from our business, and it fuels our innovation and our growth. We recognize that climate change is one of the most significant and urgent issues that's facing society and business today. The science is clear. The impacts are serious and potentially irreversible, and the need to act is urgent. So we don't just see it as our responsibility, but we also see it as essential to the long-term success of our company and of our customers as well. It's important in our minds and our actions that we continue to innovate our approaches to operations in our supply chain and in our products so that we can mitigate the effects that climate change is and will be having on us, as well as on our partners and suppliers and customers, and that we can continue to be competitive in a changing business and regulatory environment. So why do we take this approach? Well, a couple things I would point to, well, maybe three things I'd quickly point to. One is there are core values to the company that have existed since HP was founded. Global citizenship was an explicit corporate objective as far back as 1957, but that continues going forward now as a new company after separation. And our CEO was one of those who spoke up on the eve of the Paris Agreement to state that we believe our efforts to reduce energy use and greenhouse gas emissions in operation supply chain and in product use is essential to our long-term success and for that of our customers as well. It's also part of being an IT company. I mean, IT companies, like many, we're very optimistic. We very much focus on the ability for technology to help solve problems. So that drives us forward in looking at challenges like this. But then we're also an engineering company. So for us, looking at and understanding science and working in that way is essential. And we don't then treat climate as anything that would be different. And third, but perhaps really most significantly as well, is these are expectations that we are seeing more and more from our customers and from our investors. At this point, approximately over $14 billion a year in revenue is associated with customer inquiries and requirements around different types of sustainability-related procurement. And that includes everything from materials to energy efficiency to end of life, but it also includes carbon impacts, whether we have goals and what actions that we're taking. So, and likewise with investors, some of our largest investors make inquiries explicitly through us or through collective efforts to get to understand our reporting, our understanding of risk, and how we're accounting for carbon today and setting targets for the future. Our approach is, as I mentioned, essentially what we call a value chain approach, in that we're looking at all three of these major areas: our operations, our supply chain, and the use of our products. And we've set goals across the value chain to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in all of those areas. There are a set of associated commitments we've made. For example, in operations, we have a goal to reduce the absolute emissions, GHG emissions associated with those, what are called Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, by 25% by 2025 compared to 2015. This is a goal that is in line with what climate science says is going to be necessary in order for us to limit global warming to 2 degrees or less by the end of the century. In addition, in supporting this, we've made a commitment to 100% renewable energy. And we have currently an interim goal to reach 40% by 2020. We've made commitments similarly along the lines with electric vehicles for infrastructure for our employees. And I'm hoping that I expect we're going to be continuing to make steps that are going to really drive progress towards those bigger goals. Now, relatively speaking, our operations are a small part of our overall footprint, but that's where work starts, because we recognize that it's central. Our customers, and I said investors, but with our suppliers, where in turn we need to be speaking with credibility if we're going to ask them to make reductions and take actions. Most of our GHG emissions for operations are associated with energy use. So again, our efforts there are focused on energy efficiency, optimization, upgrades, consolidation of sites, and the adoption of renewable energy, of course. And just as an example, here in Boise, this was one of 3 sites that had just been through a significant retro-commissioning and set of upgrades around a lot of our energy systems, which combined with these other sites in Corvallis, Oregon, and out in Singapore, are helping us to save almost 9 million kilowatt hours annually. LED upgrades at about 6 sites, I believe Boise was amongst those. That's saving 5.5 million kilowatt hours annually and about $500,000 as well. I'll speak briefly to the supply chain then. This makes up somewhere on the order of about 40% of our emissions. And so this though is not inside of our operational control. And it's where we really have to have influence and equip our suppliers in order to understand the importance and then how to take action. So we work to establish, both directly with our suppliers and in collaboration across the industry, leading practices where they can reduce the environmental as well as social impacts while still bringing value to us and ultimately to our customers. And we have to do that through a range of incentives, which I perhaps can speak to a little bit later on when we speak in supply chain, but also capacity building. So helping them really get these skills down. We're dealing with suppliers with a range of different levels of sophistication. So how do we get them to even start looking at energy efficiency or renewable energy? And we have an energy efficiency program we've developed in concert with a number of other NGO partners. That's now since 2010, we've worked with over 200 suppliers in Asia and Southeast Asia and in China. And they've saved over $70 million through these actions, nearly 1 million tons of CO2 and about 500 million kilowatt hours. And then lastly, but not least, of course, I want to touch on the portfolio. This is where we have over half of our GHG impact. So a bit unlike looking in more of the food and agriculture, where really a lot of those impacts are happening upstream, and then ultimately at the end, there's relatively smaller. For us, a lot of this happens through our use of our products. It's thankfully to many of you as customers, your use of HP PCs, printers, and through printing. And so here for us, it's extremely important that we focus on where we can reduce energy efficiency, we can improve energy efficiency, where we can reduce the impact through paper consumption. And ultimately what we're now focused on is how we can reinvent the way that we are designing and manufacturing our products, their use, and then that we can recover them so we can drive a more circular and low carbon economy. And those are things that we're seeing mostly through shifts in our models to more as a service and subscription-based models, because those drive real value to a customer by lowering costs, but they also lower waste They can extend product life cycles and reduce related impacts in that regard, and they increase recovery and recycling as well. And finally, there's a number of digital solutions where we're looking to change the way other industries, such as commercial digital printing, graphics, food packaging. So maybe we'll have some things to talk about afterwards in that regard too. How there, as well as in manufacturing directly through 3D printing, they can change the way that they're designing and making and distributing products as well. So with that, I think I'll wrap up, and I'm sure we'll be getting on to some further discussion in the panel. Thank you.
Some more. Okay. Love this engagement. Great. We're going to start off with a couple directed at each of the individual panelists. So first one would be, Rich, how are you all looking at when you site a facility or making that decision about the siting of facility, setting up manufacturing? You mentioned the one in Twin and one in Indiana. How does climate fit into those kind of decisions?
Yeah, thanks, Julia. The Clif Bar on the siting and siting in the Magic Valley, we looked at several locations before choosing Twin Falls. We examined each of the locations sort of through the lens of our 5 aspirations that I was talking about earlier, and in all of those, business, brand, community, people, planet, Twin Falls really stood out for us. We were really impressed with the people of Twin Falls, and we immediately felt connected with the community there. It's a young, enthusiastic, skilled demographic, I think. And if Idahoans want to learn new skills, the educational resources are here in Idaho to make that happen. So what does that have to do with being more resilient? Successful organizations are becoming more adaptive. You know, they're more agile. They're quick to change direction, and they're customer centered. And the workforce here in this state, I think, enable that. Idaho Power is also largely derived from renewables, something that is also very important to our values and our planet aspiration.
Thank you. So now I've got one for David. Can you tell us about how changing climate is affecting your customer expectations and the products that you offer? How are you innovating to meet those needs?
Sure. Actually, I'd love to just to build a little bit too, as well on what Rich was saying about operations, because I like the point about really needing to understand the local context in which you're choosing to site, or how you're going to manage those facilities going forward. And another quick example here that in Boise, and I think one that's very visible to people who are familiar with the HP site or drive by, is what's going on with the landscape out there. And this, to me, is an example of where we need to look at the connections that this conference has been exploring between changing climate and other issues such as water quality and quantity. And we live in a water-stressed region, there's no question. And there are a lot of demands upon the waters that we have here with a working river like the Snake River. So if you drive by the HP site, you may see what has affectionately been called the bad haircut of the landscape. It looks like it's just dying out. And in fact, it is. And that's on purpose. Because we're taking the site, which is about the size of an 18-hole golf course, and we've been maintaining grass turf there since probably about the founding of that, and that takes over 30 inches of water a year. And by reverting this to a sustainable landscape project that is focused upon local grasses, local varietals as well, we're bringing that down to only needing 4 inches of water per year. And that's going to cut the emissions associated with landscaping by 90%. It's cutting the costs associated with landscaping in half, and it's saving over 83,000 cubic meters of water. This was only done in partnership with a number of organizations in the state and beyond, inclusive of the Stack Rock Group, for example, but also collaboration with BLM, Idaho Fish and Game, and working with them going forward. And how do we make sure this is now also a very healthy landscape, promoting biodiversity in this area, and essentially celebrating what is, a part of Idaho and in that kind of context. So to move on, sorry, it was a bit of a departure, but move on into the area of our customers and products. Well, perhaps again, unlike a number of other industries, such as in ag or in others represented here, like recreation, ours is we're not as immediately impacted directly by climate in a physical sense. But as I mentioned, it's showing itself through expectations of customers in terms of their ability to print sustainably and energy efficiency and the like. And I'm going to use an example, another story, like Erik had shared the story of the product life cycle of a French fry. So I'll share one in terms of the product life cycle of a print cartridge, which people very much probably here know about as well. And there are two ways I'm going to point out about driving a more circular economy, and low carbon benefits to that are also bringing value then to the customer. And the first is in terms of a more circular design. Now, for 25 years, we've been taking back ink and laser jet cartridges through a free take-back program. But typically, when you recover those materials, metals can go into straightforward recycling streams. But plastics were typically hard to find good use for, and they would tend to be downcycled. An example of entrepreneurship, for which I'm lucky enough to be able to share the work of so many in HP internally. Some great entrepreneurs who were working on both that take back and looking at what we needed said, well, wait a minute, we know what's in this plastic. We've already qualified it for use in manufacturing cartridges originally. Why can't we reuse that same plastic type in making a new cartridge? So initially, in that process of reprocessing the plastic, it needed to be strengthened again with some fibers. It was PET, and a readily available, known quality, high volume were plastic water bottles. And we've been able to achieve a blend of reconstituted, recycled PET that we could then use in casting new cartridges. And now this is at a global scale of where we consume the equivalent of 1 million water bottles a day into that process, which is now over 3 billion cartridges. So there's you buy a cartridge today, like an inkjet cartridge, it's going to have, I'm not going to get, I see my colleague Shelley here, I'm not going to get the percentages right, but it's going to be, depending upon the SKU, somewhere between 40 or probably as much as 70% recycled plastic within that. But the last thing is more circular models on that. And, I'm sorry, I'd be remiss to mention that, so the climate benefit there is that plastic has 1/3 less carbon footprint than using than the alternative, using straight virgin plastic materials. And we also use half the fossil fuels associated with that as well, primarily within the manufacturing process itself, as opposed to the materials. But through a more circular model as well, we can then further lower impacts. Now, two of the biggest complaints that our customers have about printing are cost and convenience. And I'm sure many people, and probably a number of students here as well, you'll be working on a project presentation that night and you're going to run out of ink. And that's the worst of all possible times. So we've developed a subscription-based service now where, based upon where you expect to print per month, you choose from a menu where for that set monthly fee, you'll be shipped a cartridge before it runs out, by virtue of an internet-enabled printer that you have. And in that way, we're cutting the cost per page by up to 50%. The carbon impacts associated with you otherwise needing to go and get and dispose of that cartridge are cut by 80%. And we also have a higher recovery rate in which to drive back into that process I was describing. So these kinds of steps need to happen with the customer in mind in terms of the ways that we can bring value into other pain points that they're having, and think about where the end of our process can become the beginning as well.
Okay, thank you, David. So something that both David and Rich spoke to earlier about the suppliers and how they're working or incentivizing with suppliers. There's a question for Erik saying, tell us, how are you working with your suppliers to think about climate resiliency and how you can drive them to get there?
Sure. Thanks, Julia. So, and when Julia says suppliers, just to be clear, we're talking about farmers, talking about potato growers. And so I'll go back to something I talked about a minute ago about the 100-year-old Russet Burbank variety, right? So if there are higher yielding varieties that have the same performance in the French fry plant and then also are just as tasty when you buy them in a fresh potato at the grocery store, if there are better, higher yielding varieties that are more resource efficient out there, why does Russet Burbank still make up 50% more or less of the acreage in Idaho? Well, there are a few reasons for that. One I touched on, it's that it's a dual purpose variety, gets used for fresh as well as French fry processing. And the other is that potatoes are very difficult to breed. They're what's referred to as a tetraploid, which means they have 4 sets of chromosomes, unlike a diploid like humans or corn, for example, who have 2 sets of chromosomes. So in this context, how do we provide solutions for growers to be more resource efficient? There's a really important plug here for biotechnology. And for those of you that aren't familiar with biotechnology, it's synonymous with plant genetics or genetic modification. And so when you look at the opportunities that are out there to improve the amount of calories that come off the land while using fewer synthetic fertilizers or other types of inputs that are harmful to the environment, biotechnology is going to play a key role. And it's important, I think, to recognize where some of the standards that have been created in the public space around, for example, organic agriculture, which I absolutely applaud, because from a soil health standpoint, there's really no better way to restore long-term health of the soil. That said, we're in this kind of polarizing debate with an outdated definition of what constitutes sustainable agriculture. Organic and sustainable are not synonymous. If you wanted to feed the world with organic, you would have to bring significantly more acres into agricultural production, and that's not what you want. So what I think we'd want to make a case for within Simplot is to rely on plant genetics to find ways to improve the yields and improve the performance of crops using less water, using less nitrogen, or that are disease resistant and can perform better with another mode of action, perhaps a biological, which is a term used to describe fungicides or pesticides that are approved for use in organic programs. If you could find a way to break down some of these barriers that exist and have these different agricultural systems work together, the amount of progress that you could achieve would be a step change difference. So that's kind of my plug for the significance of being able to use modern agricultural technology to give suppliers the tools that they need to be more resource efficient. It poses quite a contradiction to tell a potato farmer that they need to use fewer resources, but tell them that they can't use the latest technology.
So Erik, related to that, can you just tell us a story of a farmer that you have switched the way that they've done things?
Yeah, so thanks, Julia. We have growers in our network that grow organic, and we have growers that don't. And we have growers that use a number of organic practices, and they see those impacts in organic matter. They have longer crop rotations, they use cover crops. And we've invested a lot of money to develop a blight-resistant potato. With one of our growers, we've been conducting an experiment that says, all right, if you use all organic conditions, and the only exception to what's allowed in organic would be using a genetically modified potato variety in those conditions, what's the potential? And so what we've seen is we've seen a performance that's on par with conventional agriculture. We're seeing yields that are as high as if you're using synthetic fertilizers, except we're using biological fungicides for blight control combined with another mode of action and a late blight resistant potato, and we're getting the same outcome.
Thank you. So was there something you wanted to say, David? Or
I wanted to give an example in terms of incentivizing suppliers as well. And what we found successful is that you need to make this integral to the supply chain management and the relationship with the supplier itself. It can't really it can't really effectively just be a coexisting as a social and environmental responsibility initiative alongside. And an example on that was how we treated setting metrics and key performance indicators with suppliers. So initially, we had an SER, a social environmental responsible scorecard, that sat alongside, or it was even buried within, a number of other attributes against which our suppliers were evaluated each year. Time, quality, costs, et cetera, things you would expect, technology. And when we made this change back about 2 or 3 years ago was to make it a built-in part of the final score that the suppliers would be receiving as part of that evaluation and review. It covers a range of aspects like material sourcing, product compliance, labor management, environmental management. But what would happen as a result of on these scores is then their performance there could either boost their score or it could significantly decrease their score by as much as 50%. Mm-hmm. So this makes the conversation central to the supplier relationship. It sets a clear incentive. It puts the accountability on the supplier. And it ultimately gives us better transparency and visibility to data through which we can report. So I think it's key to consider how these things need to be integral to the business practice and the business case and the business relationship.
Yeah. So something that someone asked was, as industry, I've had a number of questions related to this. As industry leaders, can you talk about how you are impacting change with smaller businesses, change amongst political leaders in the places where you work, how you are taking your cloud and working to make greater change in the communities where you work?
So, I mean, I don't mean to be redundant, but I think there's something to be said for just having that really good partnership with growers. And Simplot's in a unique position in that we buy from growers, and then we also have an agricultural retail arm of our company that sells products to growers. And so it provides us a great opportunity to work kind of more hand in hand with them on, how can you get better outcomes using less environmentally impactful products. So I said that would be the example that I would point to first and foremost. I mean, and the other, we've made a number of investments here in Idaho, working with other local businesses that have products that we use in the processing plant. So one example would be replacing our wooden pallets with reusable pallets to reduce the amount of waste in the plant, and that was a local initiative. Another would be, oh shoot, I'm going to lose my train of thought. Oh yeah, it's my favorite example. Using some of the reclaimed water from the water plant to create an Idaho potato ale from Edge Brewing, which was fantastic. Thanks.
I'll give an example on the policy front, since I think that the story about engaging with smaller businesses would be along the lines of what I was just previously describing, recognizing you've got suppliers of very different sizes and sophistication. So you have to tailor the different kinds of trainings and resources that you can make available to them for them to be successful, as well as the very larger companies. From a policy standpoint, I think it's really, you have to have a very close tie-in with the government relations group to recognize where their priorities are and recognize where regulatory change is going to have significant impacts, and then be proactive and engaged on that in ways that you can be sure that that a business industry voice can be understood in terms of the whole dialogue. And in California, I believe it was just last year, the California Energy Commission was moving forward on energy efficiency requirements for PCs and for monitors. And so it was very significant, and it was a real great broad-based approach that they took to bring together environmental groups, consumer groups, and representatives of the industry in order to find what was going to be a best solution and a roadmap around which we can make improvements and innovate in order to achieve their goals. And And as a result, these standards are now coming into effect. They're going to save Californians over $370 million a year, right? So I think it's ultimately necessary to have a very broad-based collaborative approach for policy to be perspective of the range of interests, including industries.
Do you have anything, Rich, at this? Okay, I have got some other questions. There's some folks who are wondering what kind of external stakeholders are your company looking at when they're looking to measure? There's so many standards out there. There's the Carbon Disclosure Product. There's the UN Sustainability Development Goals. There's federal policy. Are there things that you all look to, like we need to meet these goals?
Yeah, I'll give one example to provide time for other comments. But one example for us is zero waste certification, and that for us brings attention to the operation and how to continue to run the business with less, and it also forces us to think. Not only in terms of percentage, but also in terms of the amount of waste that is being created inside the walls and impacting the environment outside of the walls. So I'd say, the zero waste certification would be one of very many that Clif Bar is looking to.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, likewise, I'll give one example. In the space of product for us, because it's so significant relative to impacts, relative to the business itself, are what are essentially called eco-label certifications. Here, people are really generally familiar with Energy Star in terms of Energy Star products, but there are others out there, such as EPEAT, which are certifications inclusive of a number of stages of a product's life cycle that for us are extremely important because, again, they're becoming requirements in the instances of both a number of enterprise customers as well as public sector. So our ability to meet those and to drive processes around the evolution of those and innovation within our R&D, that's essential.
I think in the context of companies and private industry doing their part to make a difference, goals are significant. And I think that Simplot is we're at the point where we're resourcing against a really important part of goal setting, which is data collection. We operate in a number of industries, and to really get a grasp of what the data suggests is how you should prioritize and invest is a critical part of that. And I think a lot of companies, maybe a lot's not the right way to put it, but there are certainly companies that put the cart before the horse and put a goal out there because it's sexy. But there is a real case to be made for having data-driven analysis to drive prioritization. And I think that's really where we're focused right now. We've got a couple of our folks here, Brandy Wilson and Kevin Tolman, that are very much focused, especially Kevin, on collecting all of this data. And it's an immense task. So I think that they play an important role. I think Simplot recognizes that. I think we're on that path.
I would agree with you from Micron's standpoint. I mean, that is something, looking at what data you have and the transparency, being transparent about that, where your holes are, where you're making efforts, and before you set those audacious goals that a lot of companies set and then go, oh my gosh, how are we going to get there? I have something about how company culture is impacting this whole drive towards sustainability. And, Rich, you spoke to a lot of that, but just how, it's in everything. Tell us, you hear it from onboarding, just talk to us about that.
Yeah, I would just say that we try to support the engagement that our employees have with climate. And so it went through a number of ways in which we do that. But I just, I think that culture just sort of grows from where Clif Bar was born, and just on how we look to run a different kind of a company, you know. And I think that just is the foundation of our values. Really creates that culture from the start.
So, Rich, you worked at a number of other companies where it's not integral into the whole business strategy. Can you speak to how you make that kind of a switch? Or
yeah, I think that's a great question, and as I mentioned in the start of my presentation, and as Toni mentioned this morning, is I think conversation is a big part of it. You know, get out there and engage with the folks that you work with. That is I think the most effective and meaningful way to bring attention to different way of doing things and figuring out how to run the business with less, for sure.
Well, thank you to you all for sending up engaging questions, and to our panelists for sharing some of their day in and day out in the climate space. And we'll look forward to the next panel.
Fantastic. Let's get the next panel to take their seats up here. Great Q&A. Thank you for filling out the blue cards. Next panel is on new business opportunities and solutions here in the state. And I'm pleased to introduce the moderator for this next panel. It's Amy Christensen. She's got 25 years experience in energy, climate change, and sustainability across policy